Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachak Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Habakkuk, the 3rd chapter. And in this chapter, it mainly deals with Yahweh Shai's return, which Habakkuk is pretty much singing, about when you read this. I believe that's why they refer to him as a singing prophet, but when you read it, you'll notice that there are certain parts in here which are not written, directly, right? It sounds more poetic because that is what it, that was the intention of it, although it has a meaning behind it. And so, yeah, let's get into it. Now, this is the book of Habakkuk Chapter 3, verse 1. A prayer of Habakkuk the prophet of Shigionoth. O Lord Yahweh, I have heard thy speech and was afraid. O Lord Yahweh, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make known. In wrath, remember mercy. Now, remember, going back to the second chapter, what he said in the first verse, right? Because these three chapters were pretty much Habakkuk in the first chapter, asking the Lord why it is, that he's allowing all this violence to to go forth without really doing anything about it. And then the Lord replies, and so it's like this back and forthish conversation kind of thing. But in Habakkuk 2:1, remember that he says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. Okay, so in the 3rd chapter here, he's saying that I heard thy speech, Lord. I heard, which thy speech in this sense, meaning what the Lord showed him, right? Him hearing the speech was likened unto him receiving the message from the Lord, which the Lord, usually speaks to prophets through visions, sometimes angels, but most of the time it's through a dream or a vision, right? And it says, and was afraid. And as we go through this chapter, you'll find out why exactly he was afraid, because the vision that or the speech that he heard of the Lord was concerning destruction to come, right? So it says here, O Lord Yahweh, revive thy work in the midst of the years. And when you go into a couple of these words here, what Habakkuk is pretty much saying is, make your presence known again. Your deeds, the reason why the world reveres you and fears you as the one true living power, right? Because for a period of time, even at this point in time, which was the reason why Habakkuk was complaining in the first place, was that all this wickedness is going on, yet, it seems as though, like it says in Ecclesiastes 8:11, sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. Therefore, the hearts of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil, roughly paraphrasing. See, so he's saying, Lord, revive thy works, make your works, your presence, your deeds known again in the earth. In the midst of the years, make known. And of course, throughout history, the Lord has done certain things here and there, but now, in this time is when the Lord is really making it known, primarily by taking us from that dead state and bringing us back to our nationality, our heritage. And the Lord is working. Right now, a precept for this is Psalms 119 and 126, which reads, it is time for thee, Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, to work, for they have made void thy law. See, and so that's what the Lord is doing, starting with us being woken up and coming on the scene. But also it's going to go into the judgments and the prophecies that have been said of old being fulfilled in this time. And at the end of that, there's going to be no mistaking and no forgetting who Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai is. It says, in wrath, remember mercy. And Habakkuk says that because he's seen the level of wrath which the Lord is going to bring. And except the Lord remembers mercy, pretty much none of us would be delivered. Verse 3, God came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. And you'll see this also in in some of the Psalms, right? Which we know the Psalms are really songs. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. Now, Teman, we know, is when you look into him, he is I believe, the grandson of Esau. Right, it says Teman, son of Eliphaz, grandson of Esau, and one of the dukes of Edom. And as it says here, right, he God, which the word God there is Allah, which is a power, right? And we know that in this case it's going to be Yahushai, came from Teman, and the Holy One, referring to the same person here, from Mount Paran, which Mount Paran is right around or not too far from Mount Sinai in the wilderness, where we were around during the time of the book of Exodus, right? And this also lines up with Isaiah, I believe 63, which Isaiah asks, "Who is this that cometh from Edom with dyed garments from Basra?" Now, similar to how when you read in the scriptures, sometimes you come across Jerusalem, and it's not always talking about the actual physical land, Jerusalem, but more so the people, wherever they are. And it's similar when it comes to Esau, because sometimes you'll hear reference to Seir or Edom or some location where Esau used to dwell. But in that precept, it might not actually be talking about that physical location, but rather where they dwell today. So sometimes you may see Edom or like Teman, for example, but it would be referring to the primary habitation of Esau, which would be America or Babylon, right? But as it says here, Salah, his glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. And his glory is going into the chariots, okay? Because when Yahushai comes back, as it says in Psalms 60, I think it's 68 and 11? No, 68 and 17, right? The chariots of God are 20,000, even thousands of angels. The Lord is among them, as in Sinai in the holy place. See, so when the Lord comes back, he's going to come with the thousands of heaven, and the chariots are pretty much going to block, the skies. They're going to fill up the skies. Okay. And the earth was full of his praise. And when you go into that word praise, it means glory, because the Lord is going to be glorified. When all is said and done, his glory is going to go throughout the earth. And that's when you read in the book of Revelation, I forget exactly where it is, but it talks about a new name, right? Which really goes into a refreshed name, meaning the Lord's name and his glory is going to be reinstated in all the earth once again. And that's going to be fully, started when Yahushua makes his return. Verse 4, and his brightness was as the light. He had horns coming out of his hand, and there was the hiding of his power. Now his brightness was as the light is just putting emphasis on the glory of the Lord's return, because usually you attribute brightness and light and shining onto something like glorious or being praised. It says he had horns coming out of his hand, and there was the hiding of his power. Now, when you go into these words, which in this chapter and other chapters as well, it emphasizes all the more why you have to look into these words, because sometimes you read it and it's translated as one English word, which has a completely different meaning than what is actually said in the Hebrew. So when you go into the word horns, you'll find out, as it says, I believe the Hebrew word there is Quran. Quran, it says horn. And one of the definitions here is of rays of light. Okay, and this is referring to the lasers that are going to be coming from the Lord's chariots, because those lasers are pretty much concentrated fire, right? Which fire is just light, or fire emits light. Okay, so those rays of light, right, which are mentioned as the horns here in Habakkuk 3 and 4, are referring to the lasers that are going to come from the Lord's chariot. And as he says, he had horns coming out of his hand. And when you look into the word hand, you have here in the Hebrew yad. But what's also interesting is one of the definitions, right, you have hand, which is like the physical hand. You can also have hand, which represents figuratively power or control, right? Job 9:24, the earth is given into the hand of the wicked, meaning that the wicked would have control or power over the earth for a period of time. But one of the definitions here, as we keep on reading, is axle, or it says axle trees or axle. Okay, and when you actually look up a axle, I'm sure, especially, those who are more, technical and interested in cars and stuff like that, you'll probably be more familiar with it. But an axle, as it says, or axle tree, is a central shaft for a rotating wheel or gear. So it's pretty much this thing right here that connects these two wheels. Like if you're dealing with a car, you have these two wheels and you have this part that connects it so that they're in sync, right? They move together and it keeps them connected. Okay, but if you notice, the axle has to go through a center or a certain portion within this wheel. Now, in no way, shape, or form am I saying this is exactly how chariots operate. I have no idea how the chariots operate, but this is just like a spiritual extrapolation that I found interesting, which is one of the definitions for hand being axle, right? And when you read the actual verse, it says here he had horns coming out of his hand, meaning he had laser beams coming out of his chariot. Now, when you usually think of a chariot, or today they'll call it like a UFO, if we type in something like laser beam from UFO, you'll typically see like an image of a disc-shaped chariot, right? Something like this, or something like this, or something like this. All right, I'm trying to see if there's an even a pretty straightforward basic one. If not, maybe we'll just go with something like this one here. Now remember, when you read in the book of Ezekiel, I believe is the first chapter, he describes one of the chariots that he saw as a wheel, right? Like a wheel in the midst of a wheel. So that's what you kind of see here, right? You see the outer wheel, and then you see the inner wheel. And this is like the main common depiction of a UFO whenever people think of UFOs, even though we know the chariots have different shapes and sizes, right? But if you look at this wheel, a wheel in the midst of a wheel, and you think of an axle, which pretty much connects two wheels, that axle goes through right in the center of this wheel. Okay, so if you can sort of imagine Habakkuk saying here that these lasers are coming from out of his hand, coming from that axle. So if this was like a disc-shaped chariots, you can imagine like the laser coming from here, right? If this was one disc and you had another disc up here, the axle would be right in the center, right in the core of that inner disc, right? So just like a little visual as to when those lasers actually come out of those chariots. Typically when you see a depiction of this, the laser comes from that inner part of the wheel, if the chariot is shaped like this. And he says here, and there was the hiding of his power, because that's where the actual force of the lasers come from, right? When they charge up, which of course they can emit dangerous, destructive, fiery rays, or they can also channel them into rays that can like beam you up or something like that, which we're yet to see the details of that. Lord willing, we experience it on the right hand side, which is getting beamed up, and not on the other side, which is getting eviscerated. Okay, nevertheless, in verse 4, Habakkuk is describing here the lasers that are coming from the Lord's chariot, because similar to what Ezra saw and described in 2nd Ezra, the 13th chapter, the Lord is going to be shooting lasers out of his chariot. Okay, so verse 5, it says, before him went the pestilence, and burning coals went forth at his feet. And when you look into let me close out a few of these tabs. The word before here is panya. Or panyam. And it says here, like face, but you also have one of the definitions, which is, see if I can find it. Right, it says here, in front of, before, to the front of, or in the presence of. All right. So in the presence of, or before him, went the pestilence. And you look into that word pestilence, you have pestilence, plague, and so on. Now in the book of Zechariah, I believe it's Zechariah 14, the scriptures talk about this shall be the plague, right, wherewith the Lord shall plague those that have fought against Jerusalem. And then it talks about how their eyes are going to melt in their sockets and their tongue shall melt in their mouth. And that's because they're going to be getting burnt with fire, primarily thermonuclear fire, but also the lasers from the chariots are also going to be doing that job of destroying people, buildings, and so on and so forth as well. Okay, so in his presence went forth, the plague or the pestilence, which in this case, and when the presence of the Lord, the fiery plague that he's going to be letting forth is going to be those laser beams, right? And burning coals went forth at his feet. And when you go into the word burning coals, it says here, I believe this is Rashab. It says here, flame firebolt. Okay, firebolt, which sounds similar to what's written here in 2nd Ezra chapter 13. Let's get that real quick. And you notice it says at his feet, right? Because you can imagine if you are in a chariot. Let's take a look. Hopefully there's some. Okay. You can imagine, maybe we'll take this. If you are in a chariot, the where the laser is going to come from would be at your feet, under you, right? Because it's pretty much at the bottom of the chariot where you would see that laser coming from. Or in this case, the burning coals being those fire bolts, right? Which a better description of that is here in 2nd Ezra 13, more specifically verse, here we go, I'm going to start at verse 9. Now, in 2nd Ezra 13, Ezra is describing, at least for the first part, a vision of the return of Yahushua. And he describes the Lord being in a chariot, and then all these nations, these armies of the world that are at war with each other, stopping their wars, getting together to come in and fight against the Lord. Today, they would generally classify it as like an alien invasion. So, verse 9, 2nd Ezra 13, verse 9, and lo, as he saw the violence of the multitude that came, he neither lifted up his hand, nor held sword, nor any instrument of war. But only I saw that he sent out of his mouth as it had been a blast of fire. So now you notice in the book of Habakkuk, he describes it as horns coming out of his hand, right? Or burning coals going forth from his feet, which is really just talking about lasers coming from his chariots. Here, Ezra describes it as the blast coming forth out of his mouth, which is really, obviously it's not going to come forth out of Yahushua's physical mouth, but it's going to come from his chariot at his command. As it had been a blast of fire, and out of his lips a flaming breath, and out of his tongue he cast out sparks and tempests, and they were all mixed together, the blast of fire, the flaming breath, and the great tempest, and fell with violence upon the multitude that was prepared to fight, and burned them up every one, so that upon a sudden an innumerable multitude, or a sudden of an innumerable multitude, nothing was to be perceived, but only dust and smell of smoke. When I saw this, I was afraid. Okay, so going back to Habakkuk 3, those burning coals that went forth at his feet, which when you look into the word for the burning coals, one of the definitions here is firebolt, all right, or spark or flame, this is how Ezra also described the lasers that came from the Lord's chariot, right? And even some more here on the Strong's definition is by analogy, lightning, right? Figuratively, an arrow, burning coal, burning heat, spark, hot, thunderbolt. Okay, so let's just say you don't want to be on the receiving end of that. So back in Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 6, he stood and measured the earth. He beheld and drove asunder the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills did bow. His ways are everlasting. And this is why I mentioned looking into these words, right? Because you might get thrown off with just the English. When it says he stood, meaning that he stood still, right? When he was still, he and measured the earth. The word measure doesn't actually mean measure as you would think in English, which is like to measure something. Here, what it means is to, I believe it says to quake or to shake, right? It says here to shake. So pretty much at the Lord's presence, the earth shook. And it makes sense, right? Not only is the vibration the Lord going to come with very heavy, but also there's going to be a lot of things going on at the return of the Lord. Missiles are going to be hitting, lasers are going to be getting shot. And like we read in 2 Ezra 13, it said that it fell with violence. So the impact was strong enough to just turn those that got hit with it into dust. Don't you think that that would cause a shaking in the earth as well? Of course. It says he beheld and drove asunder the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered, right? Meaning they were pretty much destroyed. Let's go into a couple of those words, right? The everlasting mountains were scattered. We have here to scatter, to be dispersed, to shatter, to dash to pieces. And that's going to be by way of the destruction that the Lord is going to bring. So continuing, it says here, the everlasting mountains were scattered, the perpetual hills did bow. His ways are everlasting. Now, when you, for example, bow, generally you go down, right? It almost looks like you get shorter because now you're not at your actual height. You come lower. Well, a mountain or a hill doesn't have the ability to actually bow. So in order for a mountain to bow, it would have to be crushed. And that's what's happening here at the return of the Lord. These mountains and these hills are literally, in a sense, going to be destroyed because there's going to be lasers flying around. There's going to be missiles flying around. But also, the mountains and hills also represent the various governments, right? And those various governments are also going to be pretty much destroyed and subjected under Yahweh Shai. There are certain aspects or certain parts of the scriptures that refer to mountains as governments and also hills as like lesser governments. And then there's times when they're referred to in the actual literal sense. So one example would be if you go to the book of Isaiah, the 2nd chapter, Isaiah 2 verse 2, and it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow onto it. Now, the mountain of the Lord's house. Now, although Jerusalem is a hill country, right, on a mountainous range, this is referring to the government, okay, of the Lord's house, not an actual physical mountain. So this would be an example here of where a mountain is not referring to necessarily like the physical, but more so in a body or a governmental sense. Okay, so going back to Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 7. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Now, Cushan is over there in the east. I think it's somewhere around Arabia or so, right? It says, Cushan, their blackness, a place in Arabia or Mesopotamia, site unknown. So this is like an educated guess, but it would be within around that region. And also, he mentions here the tents of Cushan. Now, the tents just really represent like the habitation, right, where they dwell in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian, which we know where Midian is over there in the east as well, did tremble. And why is that? Because these locations over here, right, the possible Arabia or Mesopotamia and the land of Midian is still within range of the valley of Jehoshaphat, where the Lord is going to bring that judgment. And keep in mind what's going on here in Habakkuk's prayer / song. He's describing the return of the Lord. So we know that at the return of the Lord, there's going to be war and destruction going on over there in the east as well. Okay, so as he's saying, he sees the Lord, coming. He sees the lasers that are coming from the Lord's chariots, the destruction, the mountains, being destroyed and crushed, the affliction of the people over there in in Cushan and Midian, right? This is why they're going to be trembling, because of all the destruction that's going to be happening. Verse 8, was the Lord Yahweh displeased against the rivers? Was thine anger against the rivers? Was thy wrath against the sea? That thou didst ride upon thine horses and thy chariots of salvation? So, and when you go into this, Habakkuk is saying, were you mad at the seas or the rivers? Because like that, I mean, you're pretty much destroying everything. Even the rivers and the seas ain't safe. Okay, it says that thou didst ride upon thine horses and thy chariots of salvation. Now, the horses are not literal horses. The horses here also represent chariots. And to prove that, let's go to Revelation chapter 6. Verse 1. This is Revelation chapter 6, verse 1. And this is a vision that the Apostle John saw. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder, one of the four beasts saying, come and see. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. And this white horse represents the Lord's chariot. He that sat on him was Yahushua. Okay, and I want to see if it's in the same. Okay, so it's not in the same chapter. I think it's actually in Revelation 19. Let's see if we can find this. It mentions here. Let's see. There we go. Revelation chapter 19, verse. I'll start at 13. And this is also, as you can see, the return of Yahushua, right? So it says here, and he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. So those white horses, we know that they're not actual literal horses, okay, but they're actually representing the chariots that the angels are also going to be coming in. So going back to Habakkuk chapter 3, as Habakkuk is asking, was the Lord upset with the rivers, the oceans, because everywhere is getting hit. Right, it says that thou didst ride upon thine horses and thy chariots of salvation. Right, going to show the horses, meaning the chariots. Now I want to look up one more word in here. See the word ride. Okay, to mount, to ride. All right, so let's keep on going. And Habakkuk is saying this because he's like, there's destruction everywhere. Verse 9, thy bow was made quite naked, according to the oaths of the tribes, even thy word, Selah. Thou didst cleave the earth with rivers. And when you go into this, when it says thy bow was made quite naked, really it just means that his metaphorically speaking, that is, right, like his bow was unsheathed, because just like a sword, you also have sheaths for bows, right? Look up like a sheath for a bow. Right, you have these things where you would actually keep the bow in as well. And like I mentioned, similar to a sword, if you were to make a sword naked, what it means is you are uncovering it. You're removing it from the sheath, and that means you're getting ready to use it, right? So same thing with the bow. And the bow just it's not a literal sense, like the Lord is not going to come with an actual bow and arrow in his hand. But here Habakkuk is phrasing it in this way to say the Lord was ready to destroy. He was ready to attack, right? Because that's what happens. If you are an archer and you make your bow naked, or you unsheath your bow, that means you're getting ready to use it. And when you use a bow, the intent is to either kill or hurt or attack. That's usually what a bow is for. That's why it has an arrow. Okay. And as it says here, according to the oaths of the tribes, even thy word, which is worded, in this way, which may be a bit confusing, but really, if you look up the same verse in some other translations, you'll sort of get the gist of it. So if we look at, for example, the NKJV, right? Your bow was made quite ready. Oaths were sworn over your arrows, as in they would never miss, right? NLT, you brandish your bow, your quiver of arrows. You split open the earth with flowing rivers, which is just metaphorical. NIV, right? You uncovered your bow, you called for many arrows. ESV, you stripped the sheath from your bow, calling for many arrows. Selah, you split the earth with rivers. So this part is really just metaphorical, going into how, the Lord was pretty much coming with destruction. He was coming ready for war. Okay, and the cleaving of the earth with rivers is just another way of putting emphasis on the destruction that the Lord came with. Verse 10, the mountains saw thee, and they trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered his voice and lifted up his hands on high. Now, once again, remember, Habakkuk is singing here. So this isn't like similar to some of the chapters in Songs of Solomon. They're not literal. If you read them in a literal sense, you're going to be very confused. That's usually how songs are. They're poetic. They're analogical, if that's a word, right? Where they say, they sing it in one way, but it means another thing. See, so the mountains saw thee and they trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered his voice. Now the ocean doesn't sing, right? It doesn't have a voice, like we do. Okay. But you can hear sounds from the ocean. It says, and lifted up his hands on high. Now we know also that the mountains represent different governments as well. And they are going to tremble at the Lord's return. And he is going to topple them. That's why even in Revelation, I believe it is 19, it mentions that the Lord had many crowns, right? Revelation 19 and 12, his eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. And he had a name written that no man knew but he himself. The many crowns are from the conquering of these different governments or these different nations and subjecting them under himself. Okay, and just to give you a visual of, for example, as it says, the water lifting up his hands on high, sort of what I imagined is something like, I think there's a picture that says, where the ocean claps. I did see something like similar to, this was the picture right here. So when you look at something like this, it's really just water. This is like maybe like two waves crashing into each other, or two sides of of the water just smacking into each other. But if you were to look at this with maybe like an artistic or metaphorical eye, it sort of looks like the water's reaching up, right? Almost like with its hands up kind of thing. But all this is just saying is, it's just metaphorical here as we're reading, what is this, verse 10, right? With the deep lifting up his hands on high. Now, for an image like this, for water to move like this, that means, like, imagine you have still waters and then something large just like crashes or hits the water, or maybe there's an earthquake, or there's all this motion going on in the earth. Then you would see the water start to move like this, right? And rightfully so, because at the return of the Lord, the scriptures talk about the earth reeling to and fro, right? You're going to have, missiles are not going to hit just land. They're going to hit water as well. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of commotion, a lot of destruction going on. But in here, this verse 10 is more so Habakkuk being poetic or more metaphorical, representing or putting emphasis on, once again, the destruction that's going to come at the Lord's return, to where even the mountains are going to tremble and the waters are going to utter their voice and lift up their hands on high. Verse 11, the sun and the moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. Okay, which once again goes into the arrows and the glittering spear goes into the lasers from the Lord's chariots. Now, keep in mind also, you are going to have missiles that are going to be hitting different parts as well. But the sun and the moon standing still is like a continuation of verse 10, right? Like today, somebody might say something like, it's going to be a cold day in hell, the day that I lose to this person. Hell, number one, doesn't exist. But if it did, it wouldn't actually be a cold day in hell, but it's just a metaphorical way of putting emphasis that you would never lose to, like, it would be almost like a natural phenomenon if you lost to this person. So hopefully that makes sense. Verse 12, thou didst march through the land in indignation. Thou didst thresh the heathen in anger. When you go into that word march, it means like to tread. And that's what the Lord is going to do, right? When you go to the book of Isaiah chapter 63, I believe it's 63. Here we go. Isaiah 63 and 4. Really, I start at 3. I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there was none with me. For I will tread them in mine anger, right? Like we just read here, that thou didst march through the land in indignation, anger. Thou didst thresh the heathen in anger, because the Lord is going to come back, and he's coming back with wrath. For I would tread them in mine anger and trample them in my fury, and their blood shall be sprinkled upon my garments, and I will stain all my raiment. For the day of vengeance is in mine heart, and the year of my redeemed is come. Okay, so there you go. Basically going to show you that the wrath and the anger the Lord is coming with and what he's going to do. Verse 13, thou wentest forth for the salvation of thy people, even for the salvation with thine anointed. So it talks about the Lord coming back, right? He's going to be shooting these lasers. He's going to be destroying. The earth is going to be in turmoil and in chaos. Okay, he's going to be, as it says, marching through the land with indignation, destroying the heathen. But also, as it says, thou wentest forth for the salvation of thy people, because in addition to the destruction, the reason that the Lord is coming back is to deliver his people, which is also mentioned in Isaiah 63 and 4, because he mentions the day of vengeance is in his heart and the year of my redeemed is come. Who is he coming to redeem? He's coming to redeem his people, the children of Israel. But more specifically, as it says, even for salvation with thine anointed, his anointed ones, which are the elect. So the Lord came, the Lord came not only to destroy, but to bring salvation to his people, primarily starting with the elect. Thou woundest the head of the out, thou woundest the head out of the house of the wicked by discovering the foundation onto the neck, Selah. Now, who is the wicked? The wicked is first and foremost Esau, Edom. Okay, so when it says here, thou woundest the head out of the house of the wicked, it's really going into how when the Lord comes back, he's gonna be destroying. He's gonna get these heathens as well, but the primary target is gonna be Esau, Edom, and that primary habitation is gonna be Babylon the Great, or America, which is likened onto the house of the wicked when you talk about habitation wise, but also the house of the wicked as in their nation, right? And as it says, by discovering the foundation onto the neck. And a quick precept for that is in the book of Zechariah, the 5th chapter. And in this chapter, it talks about Zechariah seeing this chariot that looked like a flying roll. But he mentions, right, this is the curse that goes forth over the face of the whole earth. And the main point here is in verse 4. I will bring it forth, saith the Lord of hosts, and it shall enter into the house of the thief. Or who is the house, or who is the thief? Esau, Edom. And into the house of him that sweareth falsely by my name, and it shall remain in the midst of his house, and shall consume it with the timber thereof and the stones thereof. Right, going into that, the destroying of it completely. So when you, like it says, discovering the foundation. Now, if you look at a building, when you build a building, you start with the foundation, right? You lay the foundation of the building, but the foundation doesn't remain exposed. You build upon it. And if you want to see the foundation of a building, you need to destroy it. You need to start breaking it down to where you strip away everything that was built on top of it till all that's left is the foundation. But in this case, how is the Lord going to, and that's how you discover the foundation, right? So how is the Lord going to discover the foundation? He's going to destroy it. Okay? All the way down. He's going to totally consume it. Verse 14, thou didst strike through with his staves or staves the head of his villages. They came out as whirlwind or as a whirlwind to scatter me. Their rejoicing was to devour the poor secretly. Now, as it says here, thou didst strike through with his staves the head of the wicked. Now, what ultimately what's going to be, or the head of his villages, ultimately what's going to be, or what are his staves? The missiles, because they are the weapons that Esau Edom made. Obviously, the Lord put the spirit on them to make it. But with those weapons, right, along with the lasers from the chariot, the Lord is going to use it to destroy his kingdom. Okay, it says they came out as a whirlwind to scatter me. And the me is not just Habakkuk in particular, but really is referring to Israel. It says here, their rejoicing was to devour the poor secretly. So who are the poor? The poor are Israel, because of the state that we are in, right? I know thy tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. And it says secretly. Well, let's get a quick precept. Psalms chapter, is it 64? I think it's 64. Let's see. Let's see. Here we go. This is Psalms chapter 64, verse 2. Hide me from the secret counsel of the wicked, from the insurrection of the workers of iniquity, who whet their tongue like a sword, whet meaning to sharpen, like a sword, and bend their bows to shoot their arrows, even bitter words, that they may shoot in secret at the perfect. And who the perfect? The Israelites. Suddenly do they shoot at him and fear not. So here, as Habakkuk is saying here, that the Lord is going to destroy them. But here, they came as a whirlwind to scatter me. That was their intention. Their rejoicing was to devour the poor secretly. And so that's what they did, right? Like the Esau Edom, or the wicked, devouring us who are the poor. He does that secretly through different systems that he has implemented. And they do it, but they try to do it in a way where it's not open. It's not openly, obvious. Okay, but if you look at society today, for example, who suffers the most in this system? Us. We're the most oppressed. We're the ones who suffer the most. It's the same system, but Elam, Moab, Ammon, all, they don't suffer when they come here or when they're in the system like Jake does. If you even look at, for example, the prison system, majority of the people in there are Israelites. Okay, so these things are set up really to target and to devour the Israelites, but it is done secretly, to make it seem as though it's just just a regular thing. It just so happens that we just get hit with unfortunate situations. Right, verse 15, it says, thou didst walk through the sea with thine horses, through the heap of great waters. And when you look into the word walk, it doesn't mean to take a stroll. Okay, it says here, let's see, the rock, and it says to tread, right? To march, to tread. So if you go back to Habakkuk 3, as he says here, thou didst walk through the sea, or tread through the sea with thine horses, which are the chariots, through the heap of great waters. Now, on the literal sense, of course, the chariots are going to be going, from one part of the earth to another. The primary target is going to be America, but the chariots are going to be all around the world. They're going to be flying all over in different locations. Okay, which means imagine going from the U.S. over to the east. You're traversing over water, right? But also, when you read in the book of Revelation, it tells you, Revelation 17, it describes here waters or seas being many peoples, kindreds, nations, and tongues. Right, let's go to that. Revelation, here we go, 17 and 15. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So going back to Habakkuk, thou didst walk or tread through the sea with thine horses through the heap of great waters. So in in a literal sense, like I described with the chariots going to and fro, but also the Lord, when he comes back, he is going to be treading down, like we read in Isaiah 64, upon many peoples and kindreds and nations and tongues, which is going to include heathens, Edomites, and the wicked of our people. That also includes Israelites as well. Verse 16, when I heard, my belly trembled. So you see why Habakkuk said, I was afraid at thy speech. So he says here, when I heard, my belly trembled, my lips quivered at the voice. Now, what's an example visual of this? If you see somebody that's really afraid or about to cry, and you see how their lips start to wobble back and forth, that's like an example of your lips quivering. So here he's saying this is how frightening this vision is of what's to come, right? So my lips quivered at the voice, rottenness entered into my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. When and similar to what Ezra said when he saw the destruction coming as well, right? What was Ezra's sentiment about that destruction when he saw it in a vision? Let's read that real quick. I think it's let me just word search it. It might be 2 Ezra 16, but let's go over. That's right, 2 Ezra 16 and 17. Woe is me, who will deliver me in those days? And like it says, the beginning of sorrows and great mournings, the beginning of famine and great death, the beginning of wars, and the powers shall stand in fear. The beginning of evils, what shall I do when these evils shall come? See, so that's like the what Habakkuk is saying here is when he saw this, he was afraid. Okay, and as it says here, he trembled in himself, right, that I might rest in the day of trouble. That when this destruction comes, that I might find rest. Right? When he cometh up onto the people, he will invade them with his troops. Right? And when Yahushua comes back, those troops, right, which we read, I should have probably kept this tab open. Revelation 19, those troops here being the armies, right? Revelation 19 and 14, and the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, and white and clean. So when the Lord comes back, right, when he cometh onto the people, he will invade them with his troops. So what does it say in Zechariah 5? He's going to enter into the house of the thief. He's going to come with his chariots and with the angels, okay, to destroy and to deliver. Now, when you actually read this 16th verse in like other translations, they word this last part more so like he is going to bring destruction upon those that invaded us. But I think it makes more sense in the King James Version how it's worded, right? That he will invade them with his troops. Verse 17, although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines. The labor of the olive shall fail, and the fields shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herds in the stalls. So and this is going to be because of all the destruction, right? There ain't going to be the fig trees are not going to blossom. There's going to be no fruit on the vines, no olives. The fields are not going to have any meat. The flocks, and basically because of all it's representing all this destruction, right? But what Habakkuk is saying is, though all this is going to be happening, yet I will rejoice in the Lord Yahweh. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Why is that? Because even though the Lord is coming back and is going to be very terrible and scary and destructive, that it's through that process that we gain salvation. Okay, and that's why he's saying that he's going to rejoice still, because this is going to be the work of Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai in the process of delivering us and, granting us salvation. Lord willing, we be of that number. So guess what? We're going to rejoice too. Verse 19, the Lord Yahweh, God is my strength. He will make my feet like hinds' feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places, to the chief singer on my stringed instruments. Now, I mean, this pretty much means the Lord is gonna when He makes your feet like hinds feet, He's gonna make you, you know, secure and agile, right? And I actually looked up here. Let's see, I think it's significance, because this isn't the only verse that you'll see that, right? So if we look up significance of hinds feet, there's actually an article that goes into this a little bit. I think it's this one here. And, you know, it gives some pretty good information here. Just to add a bit of context, once this loads, I think it was this website. Maybe not. 1 second. Let's see if I can find this. What was this? High places. There we go. I think it's this one. Yep. Let's see. There we go. So what exactly is hinds feet? So it says here, a hind is a female deer that can place her back feet exactly where her front feet stepped, not 1 inch off. She is able to run with abandonment. In times of danger, she is able to run securely and not get off track. The hind is able to scale unusually difficult terrain and elude predators. See, so in this instance, if the Lord makes your feet like hinds feet, you know, you're agile. He basically puts you in a position to where you can you know, escape. You don't slip, you don't fall, right? You stay right on track. And He will make me to walk upon mine high places, which, you know, in a nutshell, He's going to raise you up. In order to walk upon high places, you have to be raised up onto those places. Okay, and that's pretty much what Habakkuk is saying here. And that's the end of Habakkuk, the 3rd chapter. Like I mentioned before, in a nutshell, it's really his prayer or song about the return of Yahushai and the things that's going to entail. However, because it's a song or prayer, you know, it's in a poetic sense, you know, it's not written in a direct manner. You know, it's written, you know, with like, you know, metaphors here and there and so on and so forth. And also with a lot of these different chapters, once you really get the gist of what's the overall message being conveyed in the chapter, majority of the verses in there are really just to emphasize that point, you know, to explain that point. Okay. So with that, Lord willing, this is edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Rakha Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.